Welcome back to Stinging Back, the podcast that exposes the hidden truths behind online sting operations, the unchecked power of law enforcement, and the real cost of public safety theater. I'm A.
And I'm Am. Today we have D with us again. Thanks for joining us again, D.
Good to be here.
Now, today we're diving into a topic that hits at the core of what this podcast is all about. This week's episode is titled Entrapment Nation: Missing Evidence, Manufactured Crimes, and the Death of Due Process. Now, I saw a quote the other day that has a lot to do with this, and it's, "Only caring about your own rights is exactly how you lose them."
I saw that quote too. You shared that with me, and I love that quote. It's so fitting of this situation.
I agree. Now we're going to dive deep into the disturbing patterns of misconduct on these online sting operations. We'll be exposing how law enforcement and vigilante groups manipulate, hide, and destroy critical evidence that could prove someone's innocence.
We've uncovered repeated patterns, systemic abuse, really, where police and self-proclaimed justice warriors aren't just bending the rules, they're breaking them in ways that would get anyone arrested.
Now let's talk about the first major issue: lost or destroyed evidence. Time and again in these sting operations, crucial exculpatory evidence just vanishes. We're talking about missing parts of conversations and sometimes even entire separate conversations the decoys had with the targets. Missing video chats between the decoy and the accused. Missing phone call recordings. Missing body camera footage of the arrest. Even the profile of the ads used to lure the target go missing, sometimes replaced with a completely different profile or ad that was used to lure a particular target.
These weren't minor oversights, they were deliberate. In one case we uncovered, a man was arrested during a sting operation run by Chris Hansen's team. During a video chat with the decoy, he was shown an adult woman, not a minor. It was an adult woman. And then when he arrived to meet her, that same adult woman greeted him in person. So he confirmed that this was an adult and not a minor, even though they were trying to pretend to be a minor. He knew something was very off, and he didn't understand why she wanted to pretend to be a minor, but he knew that she was not a real minor. And what happened next was even more disturbing. Law enforcement physically assaulted him before dragging him into the house where Chris Hansen was waiting. And conveniently, there were no cameras rolling during the assault. Not Chris Hansen's crew, not the police body cameras. Officers claimed their body cameras weren't on or that they malfunctioned right at the critical moment. Only once the man was inside and facing Chris Hansen did the video recording begin. Now, I think, D, with you having been in law enforcement before, what do you think about that? Because we seem to hear that a lot, that these video cameras, the body cameras that on the police officers malfunction, or they just weren't on, or they just didn't have them at the time of these arrests. And we have heard many stories where these police officers are very aggressive and violent with these men when they arrest them.
A police's body cam is much like his pistol. I mean, I could recite to you right now the serial number on my Glock, and I haven't touched it in almost a year. That is a tool that police use, and they are very adept to being able to click the record button when they need to. It does not stay on record. It records when the officer activates it to record. Generally speaking, the new Axon body cameras will have a 30-second mute delay, meaning it will be recording, but 30 seconds into the recording, you'll hear no audio. But police generally will always try to activate their body cam when they know they're about to engage with a suspect, unless they know they don't need to be recording what they're about to do with the suspect.
Right. So it's pretty obvious that it's done on purpose. They don't record that part on purpose because they don't want that evidence.
Or they do record it. It's not an accident. They do record it and then claim, "Oh, no, we don't have it."
So that's actually a pretty interesting point. So the way the discovery works in these cases is the district attorney will request the discovery from the officer, right? There is no admin in that. There is no, okay, let me upload everything. Most of the time, what happens is the officer will walk into the district attorney's office with a flash drive or an SD card or a CD, and it will hold what the officer is providing as discovery. It's very, very rare, extremely rare, that everything is brought to discovery.
Right, and that brings up the question whether or not the officer did hand everything over, and then the prosecutor and his team deleted and edited or omitted all the exculpatory evidence.
Well, and in this case, it's interesting because they knew that the man was on his way and showing up, and not only did the officers have cameras on them, but there was a Chris Hansen team that had cameras there too. So to me, it seems very intentional that they, did not record, or if they did, they're hiding that evidence of when he first arrived there and he was presented with that adult woman and then he was physically assaulted. The cameras did not start rolling until after they dragged him into the house and set him up with Chris Hansen to create the show for his YouTube channel or wherever it is he airs his this scam that he's running now continued after they shut him down from the TV show. He's still doing it. And so, yeah, it was completely staged and they're hiding that part and they're even denying that even happened, which makes it even more interesting.
Right, my imagination on that goes with, the poor guy being hauled in arm locks and arm bars, being thrown down on the couch, and right away he's swarmed by makeup artists to clean him up and, okay, action, 1, 2, 3, camera rolling. And the guy's going,
If I may, could I just ask a question?
Sure.
Was his Miranda rights ever told to him prior to this interview?
Not with the Chris Hansen interview. I don't know if it
and we have no idea.
And this is a guy who was foreign. This is his English is his second language, so that was another problem that the translations or interpretations were different, and his communication skills were different. So they were making fun of that too. And he even clearly says it in the video that he knew that wasn't a minor, or he didn't think that was a minor. And of course they say, oh, sure you didn't. Of course, this was an adult hookup site where they were coming on to him very aggressively and showed him an adult woman. And then, of course, it's set up to make it look like he's the one lying, when in reality, it's Chris Hansen and his team that were lying, just using him to create a show for their own purposes, right? So here's the other pattern. Selective conversation deletion. Law enforcement often omits early messages where the accused is cautious, skeptical, or even entirely uninterested. In some cases, those first messages were non-sexual, or the target expressed doubt that the decoy was real, or concerned, or expressed some concern about their age. Those are also intentionally omitted.
We've seen cases where the only conversations presented in court were after the man started playing along, often trying to get a real-life meeting to confirm if they were being catfished. That's not criminal intent. That's trying to get clarity. But police delete those early messages. And why? Because they show the man wasn't pursuing a minor. It was the decoy who kept pushing the conversation in a sexual direction.
So, Dee, in your law enforcement experience, how familiar were you with these cases about adults grooming minors?
The cases I know were cases that were actually real. It's actually really interesting that we talk about it now, because you would think that it would be the main talking subject within a police force, and it's not. It's actually I until about perhaps a year ago, I didn't even know about them, and I think that's done intentionally, so law enforcement don't know what some of them are doing. And that's really because what they're doing, it's It's really a newer concept. I mean, law enforcement, they advertise their sting as some type of new creative way of finding child predators, but really what it is just another way to get around the Fourth Amendment. Um, and I don't see it lasting. But my knowledge on the way they were doing it, and the way they're doing it now, was none. I don't even know how it's legal.
So the reason I'm asking is because they act like they really do have a true concern about minors going onto adult hookup sites and soliciting random adult male strangers to meet for a casual sexual hookup. And so that's why I'm asking you, is this something you ever even heard of when you were working in law enforcement?
It is not. And of course, I got out of law enforcement, I would say about probably about a year ago. I never even heard the idea of them trying this. Again, I think that was done intentionally so they could keep what they were doing quiet. Because there's enough guys in law enforcement that if they hear of something that's unconstitutional or illegal, they're going to throw a fit. I mean, it's a rare group of individuals who are willing to stand up and say, "Hey, I'm a constitutionalist. I don't like this. This is wrong." But there are out there. There are good cops out there. I'm not going to sit here and say that police are bad people. I would say probably about a good 20% of them are probably bad people, but most of them are good people. I think what normally happens is they kind of get caught up on the idea of I'm protecting children, and they develop a hero complex, and they're able themselves to be groomed by these third party groups into thinking that they're actually protecting children by going to adult websites to find child predators. It's one of those things. As soon as you say it out loud, you go, "Wait, that don't make no sense. Shouldn't we be going to Roblox or I don't know somewhere we reasonably expect children to be to find somebody who's actively going out of their way to find children?"
Right. So I think the problem is just that most people just don't know or understand what's actually happening or don't know enough or understand enough about it, and maybe some of these officers who are participating in these things don't really know, and they're not paying enough attention to really know what they're doing and contributing to.
Well,
uh,
I think they're really selective. Where I'm from, in order to do these task forces, you have to go through, of course, certain training.
Mhm.
And I think even in the first place, to be picked to go into these task forces, you have to pass certain interviews and probably some exams, etc. So they are very selective on who they will pick into these groups. And if someone in these questionnaires say, I'm a very strong believer of the Fourth, Fifth, and 14th Amendment, then they're not going to get picked for these task forces.
It's actually very interesting you bring that up, because we used to do background packets. The officers would be in charge of doing background packets. And that's essentially where we look at you with a microscope, and then we realize the microscope isn't enough, so we bring out the mega microscope and we look at it a little harder. I mean, it's down to where'd you go to elementary school, and one of the questions on there is, how do you feel about child sex offenders? And it's actually a checkbox of, does this person show a prejudice toward them? And that's actually something they look for in the background packet. Um, it's interesting you brought that up. As far as the people that are selected for the stings, again, another really interesting subject. The people they are picking for these stings, I've noticed, have some bad uses of force in their files. And what that means is they straight up engaged in police brutality, and they were able to get a level of remedial training for the department to say, yes, we have fixed this person. They needed more training. That was on us. That's our badge. He's good now. And they deliberately put these cops who have this predisposition to take uses of force further than what they need to go in these things.
That's very interesting because we have also noticed that some of these decoys, the vigilante groups that have been conducting these sting operations, a lot of them also seem to have like criminal backgrounds or, something in their background like that that shows these are people with poor morals and poor ethics. Chris Hansen himself being one, right? Like he has a history of fraud, like running these sting operations is not the only fraud he's engaged in. He's done it, in other areas as well. And so I think that's a good point that they must be intentionally choosing, people who do seem to have poor ethics, poor morals, just don't care, or they are playing on those people's emotions, convincing them that they're doing something good. Maybe these people, were themselves abused. So then they play on those emotions and make them feel like, you're doing something good because you're going to help us catch the bad guys. And so it's that, or it's just people that just don't care, or it's people that get a thrill from, causing harm to others. But there's clearly something really off about those who are conducting these sting operations. They're not in it for the right reasons.
It's a high standard of government grooming. For example, I mean, you look at Tom Ballard. That guy is facing
Oh,
quite a few accusations.
Tim Ballard.
I'm sorry, yes, Tim Ballard.
Oh,
And
yes, that
who's
perfect
that?
example.
Who's that Russian guy on TikTok we see shaving guys' heads? Vitaly.
Oh, I saw that one.
Yeah, he was arrested in the Philippines for harassing people. I think they gave him 24 years.
Yes, and how long had he been conducting these online sting operations? He was doing more than just the online sting operations, right? I mean, he's just someone who enjoyed harassing people, tormenting people, but he was also conducting these online sting operations and was obviously doing it for entertainment purposes and
Oh
for
yeah.
his own thrills. He was shaving someone's head and acting like, oh, the pedophile deserves this when really he just created it all himself.
Well, to me, it's interesting because we see this person who has a predisposition to want to hurt others, right?
Right.
And to the point where he goes to another country and gets arrested for it. But it's like he needs to create this scarecrow argument to be able to get away with it. Well, you
Hmm.
should be hurting people. Oh, I was doing it to people who were, actively looking for children.
Hmm.
So I get to do it at that point in time. And it's one of those arguments where, that sounds okay. But you start looking at his cases, one in particular, he has a decoy there who's doing like a split where her butt cheek is sticking out from the split. And Vitaly looks down and goes, damn. Hold up, she's supposed to be a minor. She's not one, but she's supposed to be one.
Hmm.
To jail with you. We're going to shave your head while we're at it. To me, that's really interesting. That he himself can look at that as a man
Hmm.
and see this woman who's sexually exploiting herself to lure these men in and go, wow, that's really attractive. And then on the other hand, he lures somebody in that way and he's going to tattoo pedophile on him. He's going to have somebody beat him up. He's going to shave his head. He's going to, do all
Yeah.
these really cruel and unusual things to this person in lieu of calling the police.
Yeah. These are people who are just looking for an excuse to justify their violence against others.
Mm-hmm.
These are not good people.
And interesting enough, there was another YouTuber that did it. I don't know why these cases are starting to really pile up from these YouTubers, but one was being done by Jadon, I think his name is. He's a YouTuber. And he makes some pretty good content. He's kind of a funny individual, but um, I think he actually found a real child predator who had a predisposition to go after children. You know, I think some of these cases are probably good cases. I'm not going to down them all, um, but in this case, the police were called, and come to find out, they would not have even showed up if the person they did this to did not already have an arrest warrant. So, the YouTuber's trying to milk the sting he did and saying, well, this is why you're being arrested. And the police officer that's arresting the guy says, oh, no, it's because he has warrants. Like, we would not have even come if we didn't know he had warrants. So police are, catching on that these people are not professionals. They're doing illegal stuff, and it's not going to stand up in court. Um, Now, why they can't have that same energy when federal grant money comes around and says, "Hey, we'll give you $400,000 to do this." I don't know why they can't, stand up to, corruption during that time.
Yeah,
Um,
I
I,
think law enforcement also doesn't like the vigilante groups because the vigilante groups have also helped expose their tricks. And so because the vigilante groups are not as cautious in covering up their dirty deeds like law enforcement has been able to do to get away with this, and the vigilantes, we figured out that what the vigilante groups have been doing is the exact same thing the police officers have been doing. It's just that law enforcement has more resources and is able to hide their tracks or cover their tracks a lot easier than the vigilante groups have done. So, and like another recurring trick that we've seen is when they present in their evidence false profiles or ads that they use. They say, this is the profile that this man responded to, or this is the ad that this man, responded to, and it's a completely different one than the one they actually used. Sometimes they'll even use different people in the profile picture. For example, in one case, the police used pictures of a certain woman to lure the man into the chat. And once they got him going and they agreed to video chat, then they presented a completely different woman on the screen. She was even a different ethnicity. This was a different face. This was not the same picture they had sent him. So it was clear that to this man, he immediately noticed that this is a different person, and rightly so believed that something was wrong. So them claiming to be a minor just fit into, this person is not showing me who she truly is. She's it puts into question whether she's a real minor or not. It was clear that this is someone just playing games with him. But in court, they only showed the photos, or to the court, they only present the photos of the first woman, and that's what they use in the evidence. And they never even showed the second woman to show that they showed this man another woman. And the video chat was completely excluded. So that's another thing that gets intentionally excluded from the evidence, which is exculpatory evidence.
And in another case, law enforcement didn't even provide the actual chat logs from the platform where the conversation started. They only submitted emails or texts that came after the decoy had steered the conversation sexually. It's not justice, that's manufacturing a crime.
For sure. And, it gets even more disturbing. In the vast majority of these things, the decoy is the one who introduces the idea of the sexual activity with the minor. That's not just immoral, it's potentially illegal.
Right, so let's talk about 18 U.S. Code 2422A. It criminalizes knowingly persuading, inducing, or coercing anyone to travel in interstate commerce for illegal sexual activity. That includes enticement, even if the person is an adult. If you're encouraging someone to engage in sex with a minor, you could be guilty of the crime you're accusing someone else of.
Yeah, and isn't that exactly what the decoys are doing in these sting operations? Let's not forget about 2422B, enticement of a minor, plus conspiracy statutes under 371 and aiding and abetting laws. These decoys, whether vigilante or law enforcement, are initiating criminal scenarios. They're crafting the crime. They're baiting adults who were seeking consensual encounters with other adults and then suddenly switching the age mid-conversation. That's textbook inducement. So this also applies to situations where the decoy escalates things by presenting an incest or taboo porn scenario. For example, soliciting men for sex and then introducing a minor into that adult sexual situation, such as claiming to be a mother with minor children or a woman with a minor sibling she wants to include in the sexual activity that she's inviting the man to participate in. if these scenarios are supposed to be treated as if there were a real minor involved and it wasn't just, an incest taboo porn scenario or just taboo fantasy scenarios used in the adult entertainment industry, then this is if this is not supposed to just be dismissed as role play or fantasy, and they're supposed to, it's supposed to be treated as if it were a real minor involved, then by their own standard, the decoy has violated 2422B by enticing criminal conduct involving a minor. So basically, they are sex trafficking the minor, even though the minor is imaginary, right? But we're supposed to treat it as if it's a real minor. So ironically, this law that some of these men have been charged with violating, it actually applies to the decoys behavior, don't you think? What do you think, Dee? Am I off by, is that a long stretch?
It's really not. And we talked about last session about using entrapment as a muscle that needs to be worked out. Using federal codes in order to enforce laws in your state and or county, that's again another muscle that needs to be worked out. Because a lot of these state or state agencies or these county agencies, I don't much see municipal agencies doing it. Every now and then they need a they need a lawsuit. They need a little lesson in constitutional law, and that's where flexing your federal rights come into play. I mean, when it comes to federal government versus state or county goes by state, they do have some county laws, but most of the time they're enforcing state laws. Um, they need to be reminded that federal government is the supreme law of the land. That is how it is written out. Um, so I know I don't believe you're too far off. I just I just can't believe law enforcement is engaging in this behavior and they don't actively know they are crossing the line.
Or they don't care.
Right.
Yeah, I just think if it's just a matter of checking off the boxes, and if we can check off all the boxes, then the law, it can be applied that you violated this law because that's basically what they're doing in these sting operations. So, but the same thing can be done, in reverse to them. The boxes check off, so we can say they committed the crime too, because they were trafficking minors.
Well, I hate it because I used to be on these guys' team. I look at some of these comments these people are making, and I get hate. I understand it. I used to be there myself, but you don't understand what's actually going on. What these people are doing is evil. It is illegal. It's evil. It's a misrepresentation of the facts. It's an alienation of the evidence finding process, and it's just wrong. It's the same thing as a woman falsely accusing a man of raping her. It's a false accusation all the way around.
They are promoting and encouraging the sexual abuse of children in order for them to pretend like they are solving crime, but the crime never existed. It would have never, they created it just to pretend like they solved it. It's just crazy.
A vast majority of the law enforcement officers that are engaging in these things are being groomed to engage in these things. Like
And they're
the being arrested aren't the only ones getting groomed. It's also the officers.
right. And they're getting paid for it too. It's really a few at the top that are running the whole thing, and it comes down to money.
It is. I've said this before in some private conversations, but if you want to look for real police corruption, it's not necessarily the guy with the knee on the guy's neck. It's the captain. It's the lieutenant. It's the colonel. It's the higher up in the tall building, allowing that individual to continuously engage in that behavior.
And then, of course, they need the cooperation of the district attorney who will help them make this happen and push through these wrongful convictions, wrongful charges, and wrongful convictions.
Sometimes the attorneys have the stones in order to say, Yeah, no, I'm not processing that. I'm not going to put my bar certificate on the line through your narrative. I have seen that happen several times. I've been in court, like there'd be like a bull room in the back where some law enforcement officers are shooting a bull, talking about their case or whatever, and the district attorney will walk in and she'll say or he'll say, "Hey, yeah, sorry, I'm not going with this. You made a mistake. Better luck next time. This is what you could do to be better." And I want to be clear. That's not a rip on the officer's case. I think everybody makes mistakes. Police are no, they're not different from that. They can make mistakes. Some of them are very good at making mistakes. Um, it's just, hey, you alienated the evidence finding process. I can't process this because of it. This is what you could do better next time. And that's the way it's supposed to work. We are not ever supposed to see a district attorney with a police agency on one of these police press conferences talking about a sting that more than likely the higher up nor the district attorney has seen the discovery on. That is inappropriate. It is an alienation of the judicial powers, and it can lead to a vast number of lawsuits.
Now, just to be clear, legally a minor cannot consent to sexual activity with an adult. However, minors can still be held accountable for criminal conduct. If a real minor were to solicit an adult for sex and actively encourage it, that minor would technically be soliciting someone to commit a crime. They can't consent to the sex, but they can engage in behavior that constitutes the solicitation of a criminal activity.
Exactly. And when you think about the kind of charges these men are hit with, often crimes that are categorized as crimes of violence, it gets even more serious. Under 18 U.S. Code 373, which covers solicitation to commit a crime of violence, it's illegal to solicit another person to engage in conduct that would constitute a felony involving violence. So if the crime the men are charged with is treated as a crime of violence, and a minor were to solicit the adult to participate by encouraging sexual conversations and inviting them to meet, then technically that minor would be violating 18 U.S. Code 373 by soliciting someone to commit a crime of violence. Of course, in these things, it's not actually a minor. They're just pretending like a minor would be soliciting the adult man to engage in a sexual conversation and to invite him to meet for sexual activity. It's always an adult decoy in these things, right? But this just underscores how completely backwards and legally questionable these things really are.
Right, and when you lay it all out like that, it's clear these stings aren't just crossing ethical lines, they're crossing legal ones too. It's not about protecting kids, it's about manufacturing crimes, creating easy targets, and making money. And speaking of manufacturing, let's get into how they outright fabricate evidence just to make sure they can win these cases, no matter what the truth actually is.
So we've talked about how evidence can just vanish when it would actually help the defense, but there's another side to this too, and it's even more disturbing. Not just hiding evidence, but fabricating it, making it up from nothing.
Exactly. In one especially alarming case we looked into, law enforcement didn't just interpret something wrong, they invented a whole history that never existed and then used that fiction to indict a young man.
So here's what happened. During the interrogation, they strapped the young man to a polygraph and then used it as a tool to accuse him of lying. The officer claimed he knew the young man had been sexually inappropriate with minors before, even inventing a story that there had been at least two separate incidents. He demanded that the young man confess and describe both times he had done this to a minor. And there was absolutely no basis for any of it. There were no reports, no allegations, no evidence, nothing. The detective simply made it up and then pressured the young man to go along with the false narrative.
And under that pressure, desperate to make it stop, the young man started fabricating stories. The first one is painfully clear. He's just trying to come up with something. He says that one time a teenage girl bumped into him at an airport and he got excited. It's so obvious on the video he's scrambling. It's completely made up, but he figures maybe this will get the detective off my back.
But it didn't. The officer demanded a second story. And since this young man really hadn't even been around minors, the only thing he could think of was a younger female cousin, someone he barely even knew. He said that once he brushed her shoulder and thought to himself, she would grow up to be a fine young woman one day. That's it, shoulder. Even in this made up story, he couldn't even bring himself to say that he had done anything horrible to her.
And again, this was not good enough for the detective. The officer coached him further, saying, no, it wasn't her shoulder, it was her breast, right? Say it. And under that pressure, the young man, trying to give the officer what he clearly wanted, he agreed.
He agreed to a false story invented by the detective. He assumed they'd follow up, talk to the cousin and her parents, and realize that it just wasn't true. But they never did, because they knew it wasn't true. It's obvious from the video that he was coerced to make up two stories about this. They didn't want the truth, they just wanted a case.
And they used that fabricated confession, extracted under intense psychological pressure, as key evidence to indict him.
This is what real fabrication looks like. They couldn't find a crime, so they invented one. They couldn't find a victim, so they created a fake one and never even bothered to check if she even existed.
And it shows just how far some of these operations are willing to go to protect their image, at the cost of real human lives.
Yeah, it's not about even trying to save or protect children from abuse. The only thing that matters to them is to make the public and the courts believe that this is what they are doing. The court never even heard that they had coerced this false confession out of him when, by the time this made it to trial, they just buried it and pretended like it never happened because they didn't want it coming up at his trial.
And then there are cases where they try to pass off just screenshot conversations as evidence. Let's be clear, screenshots are not legitimate digital evidence. They can be altered, cropped, or taken out of context. Yet police rely on screenshots all the time, ignoring proper digital forensic protocols.
We've also seen timestamps and dates manipulated. In one shocking case, prosecutors used an entire conversation from a different person, not even the man being charged. Yet they pursued prosecution for years with that fake evidence before they finally agreed to just drop the case. Dee, what do you know about screenshots being used as evidence? Is law enforcement really allowed to just use screenshots of a conversation to prosecute someone?
They have used it in the past. It's totally admissible. It's going to be up to the defense to articulate that I was meaning something else. I think we can all relate to that. Whether you're talking to somebody in the cold conversation and you send something and, all of a sudden you get this attitude back and you're wondering, why am I getting this attitude? And, you read your text back a few times and you call the person and you say, hey, listen, I believe there was a miscommunication. I was joking. That happens all the time, and they're not going to care whether or not it was in context, out of context. What they care about is how is a jury going to look at this?
Do you think we'll ever get to the point where the courts will start requiring forensic analysis to confirm that the digital evidence has not been tampered with before they allow it as part of a prosecution?
If it does happen, it will happen because of these things. I mean, I personally think it's something that could happen because for the drug operations that go on. Because I've seen some pretty bad federal cases where people are, sent to federal prison for years, and they're sent to federal prison for years on the conspiracy of drug trafficking and not actually drug trafficking, which is kind of silly. Like some people are spending 5 years in federal prison because of one text. One text, they are sent to federal prison for 5 to 10 years of their life. For me, if I'm sitting as a jury member, I'm going to need more burden of proof before I send somebody away for 10 to 5 years, especially if I don't see prior criminal history showing me that, hey, this person engages in this. It's just one of those things where I have to see predisposition to do so. Even if it looks that way, I need to see predisposition. But again, I really see a lot of case law going to be coming out of these sex cases coming out, especially in Florida and Polk County with Judge Grady. That
Mm-hmm.
guy, that guy's probably going to be responsible for signing up quite a few lawsuits and case laws, especially some that go to the Supreme Court.
I heard that he's been friends with Chris Hansen for like 40 years. Apparently, he was bragging about it in the media. So that explains a lot.
I was actually a pretty big Trump fan until I, started reading about the people he's been appointing, and it makes me more and more disappointed. Because what it is it's people that don't necessarily know how to do the job. They're not necessarily subject matter experts. It's more so
Loyalty.
it's actors to me, but yeah, loyalty too.
Right, and that gets into the gray area on the task force's judgment on how they're, the gray area of the laws, which there's not supposed to be a gray area.
No, they're not. There's two ways looking at law, case law, or the constitutional law, and that's simply the law should change in order to modify with the times. That's more of the leftist way of looking at it, and I can argue that because we have people that don't even identify as their correct gender. Power to them. Do what you want. We got the First Amendment. It says express yourself the way you want to. And then you have the law is the law, even if the heavens fall. And that's going to be more so the conservative view of Constitution and constitutional law, that if they broke the law, the letter of the law, then they broke the law. It's just two different views.
We just need to bring in more experts. For example, our expert friend who can analyze digital evidence and has shared with us that it is very easy for law enforcement to manipulate digital evidence, and he has seen a lot of that. And even though in these sting operations, most of the time the men don't get their phones back, uh, the prosecution is required to provide a phone dump to the men. Of course, they avoid doing that, even when the defendant directly asks for it. They put it off and put it off. But if anybody that's been trapped in a sting operation that did not get their phone back, you can request a phone dump, and then a forensic analyst can analyze that, and they are able to tell if that evidence has been manipulated.
Well, and we have a recent one where the police claimed to have the suspect's laptop, and eventually it was discovered that the laptop was turned into this gentleman's former employer. So they didn't even have access to the data and the digital evidence anymore.
Yet they continued to prosecute him, right? Just like in the
Right.
previous case where they didn't even have the evidence, they didn't even have the right conversation. They were trying to use someone else's conversation, but they still pursued him for like 5 years, trying to bully him into taking a plea deal. They didn't even have the evidence to prosecute him. And good thing he didn't give in, because then eventually they did drop the case because they didn't have the evidence to prosecute him. Overall, parents and communities are being misled. These things are not protecting children. They are exploiting fear, targeting adults in adult online spaces, and manufacturing crimes through deception.
And we're not saying predators don't exist, but we are saying this is not how you find them. This is how you create them, through coercion, deception, and abuse of power.
And the real victims? Those are the real children who are suffering, who need real help. They are the ones that are being ignored. They are the ones that are being targeted in the online spaces where children are hanging out to meet other friends. These children are not looking for random adult strangers to solicit them for sexual conversations or to invite them to meet to have a sexual hookup with them. These are children just being children. Those are the real victims. They're not being protected. In fact, these sting operations are taking the focus off of that. And it may even be that those real predators that are targeting those children know very well that these sting operations are actually helping protect them. It's keeping the focus off of them. They're too busy targeting men on adult hookup sites where there are
Yeah,
no children.
The real predators are going where the children are.
The law enforcement and the vigilante groups, they care more about arrest stats, and because that's more profitable than chasing the truth.
I would challenge the viewer to imagine the same crime where there's a real said victim, and the setting occurs, at a bar where you go there and you're going to drink. Legal age to drink in America is 21. So you go there to drink. You see this lady talking to you, and she appears to be an adult. And conversation goes good. You take her home. You engage in sex. And, you wake up in the morning and you're being put in handcuffs. In fact, you're being dragged out of your house through the dirt. Your arms are being bent to your back. You can't move your arms. You have joint pain. The joints in your wrist are now inflamed. And now you're being ridiculed as some type of child monster for going to the bar where you expected to, drink with adults. And now you're being called some type of child predator. Think about it in a reversed way. In that sense, if these cases were built on that, they would not have a leg to stand on. Because at the end of the day, that person went to a place where adults are. You have a greater chance of finding a minor at a bar than you do on some type of online adult sex hookup site. So if you think about it reversed, where it did happen and there's a real victim, they don't have a case, or it's not a great case per se, because, even if she says, oh, yeah, I'm 13 and I'm drinking at this bar, well, you're probably going to somewhat laugh that off because the idea of it's so obscure that it's really unbelievable. So, right then and there, you're in this position where this woman who appears to be an adult, has adult features, is drinking with you in an adult place. She's an adult. She appears to be an adult. She's at an adult place for all purposes. She's representing herself as an adult. It's a really easy way for somebody who has no predisposition to commit a crime, has no want, need, desire to be around children. Therefore, that's why they go to places where they are going to find adults, can easily be criminalized and just ruined.
And I think it's crazy to say that just because somebody, said they were 13, 14, or 15, after they solicited you for sex, at that point, it doesn't matter how old they claim to be. This is not going to be a real minor, because if they really were, they wouldn't be telling you that they are underage. And they're not likely to be soliciting a random adult male stranger for sex either if they are a minor. But even, let's say, for some odd reason, there are minors who want to solicit random adult male strangers for sex online. I've never seen it or heard of it, but let's say, because these people like to say, but it could happen. So let's entertain their fantasy about, 13, 14, or 15-year-olds wanting to do this. They're not going to tell you that they're underage. They're going to pretend to be an adult. So if somebody has solicited you for sex online and then turns around and tells you that they are underage, that is always going to be a catfisher. That is someone that's either going to be a sting operation, or it's going to be a catfisher, somebody who wants to extort you for money, someone who will tell you that you can just pay them off and they won't call the police on you. It's always going to be that. I have yet to hear any real case where the minor solicited a random adult male stranger for sex and then turned around and told them that they were a minor. In the real cases, they pretended to be an adult the whole time, and they were not the ones soliciting the sex. They let the man or the adult talk them into it. That's how real cases happen.
This episode is Entrapment Nation, Missing Evidence, Manufactured Crimes, and the Death of Due Process. It's time we started asking who's really committing the crimes.
Thanks for listening to Stinging Back. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, And share this episode with someone who needs to hear the truth, because the truth matters.
Now, until next time, keep questioning, keep watching, and keep fighting back. Don't forget to check out our friend Norm's YouTube channel, ICAC Unpacked, our friend Kathleen's blog, Lady Justice Myth blog, ladyjusticemyth.blog, and the new Facebook page, Uncage Us. That's UNCAGEUS.